Yeah. Belief 9, Claire, lockdowns are not harmful. I mean, just a bit of a lockdown. What's the big deal?
I mean, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because there were some people, especially people who are actually quite powerful, who loved lockdown. And still talk about what a lovely time they had, and they did. Like, it's fine, they did, okay, but they seem to be completely blind to the idea that that was not the experience of a lot of people, and that it shouldn't take long to sit down and come up with examples of who lockdown would be bad.
If you've got your own grouse moor, it's okay. You could go for a walk there every day on your private property, couldn't you? And maybe have a dip in your swimming pool and then go into your garden sauna. What's to complain about?
Yeah.
Just imagine, the single mum with 2 kids in an upper story flat. It's just, the condescension is just...
Yeah, completely unbelievable. And like, even, there's sort of all of that pressure that is on those sort of single parent families, which, it's bad enough normally, actually, that, you need to have other adults in a child's life and other children in a child's life. And in fact, I've got 4 children. They needed other children in their lives. Their siblings are not enough. And the impact that it had on them was really profound. And I've had people say to me this week, someone in education saying, I've really noticed these cohorts coming through now to university level. They're really emotionally immature. You're like, yeah, they are. Why is that then? As if they just hadn't put 2 and 2 together about how that happened. And then, of course, you've got the youngest children whose language development was harmed and in a measurable way, where they weren't seeing faces, they weren't seeing the mouth movements, they probably weren't hearing people as much, because, if you're stuck with a very young child indoors all of the time, it's likely you're going to be a bit depressed and you're not going to be engaging with them in the way that you otherwise would be. And that has an impact on a child who only goes through that development stage once. You can't go back and sort of fix it. It's happened.
And, the painful when you think about it now, grandparents talking to grandchildren through a window, not being able to visit. My dad was in hospital for some of that time, and my mum could go and see him through the window because he happened to be on the ground floor. But of course, most people are in these hideously designed new hospitals we have now with, they don't even have windows that open. And it just, the idea that you could be married to someone for 60 years and then, at the most crucial time in their life, you can't see him now.
I know. And it's really...
I'm struggling to control not getting angry now.
I know. Well,
and my dad didn't understand.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is that was, that story and the story of people dying on their own as well. Those stories are like multiplied across the country. It happened to a lot of people. And those people obviously were very, very vulnerable. And so we can't sort of point our finger at them and say, well, you should have objected and you should have said, you should have made sure that didn't happen, because they were at their most vulnerable. And it was the rest of us who weren't standing up for them.
Well, you simply weren't allowed into the hospitals wouldn't have let you in. But the point is, most of us believed, now looking back with outrageous naivety, it won't happen again. We believe that what our politicians and chief medical officers were telling us was necessary. And most people believed the rules. Now, some people in certain streets in London didn't obey the rules. They had parties after work.
Yeah.
Some people did. And but most of us, we obeyed the rules.
Yeah, but
while the elites were drinking wine, it's just...
Some of the rules made absolutely no sense. They just made absolutely no sense. So if you remember in care homes, like even as late as last year, if there was an outbreak in a care home, maybe this is still happening in some of them. If there's an outbreak in a care home, you can't come in and visit. Like, hang on a sec. Who's protecting who here? Right, the outbreak's in the care home. You're a young, healthy relative who wants to come and see a relative that could potentially die, and you're being stopped because of what exactly?
And these harms were predictable as well. It's nothing that you couldn't have worked out. I suppose at the time a lot of us did realise it, but we just did what we were told because we accepted this narrative. It was only more informed thinkers such as yourself that saw through it.
Well, I think a lot of us, we all of us outsource our thinking to trusted experts because we can't do it all on our own. We just can't. And so you have to have people that you can trust. And the people that we trusted were lying. And so then you've got this sort of middle ground of people who should have been calling them out. And that's the bit that failed. Like when you've got someone who's making an error in a position of power, that can happen, right? Deliberate or not, that can happen. But we have systems in place to call it out. We have political opposition, which didn't exist. We have a media that was censored with the Ofcom guidance, so they did not do any calling out. And then, of course, we have all the other experts. So we have the medical profession, right? Should have been calling this out. And the trouble with the medical profession is that we also have our trusted experts. And medicine is a lot of knowledge to keep on top of all of the time. And so doctors are hugely reliant on these trusted channels of communication, whether they're from the colleges or from, guidance from the NHS or wherever it is. They need that to support their work. And so if somebody comes along and says, all of these things that you're doing to avoid having to do any work are deceiving you, then they will just stick their fingers in their ears because they can't have that destroyed. They just can't cope with that being destroyed because it requires them to then actually do the kind of level of work that they cannot do on top of their day job. It's not possible to do it.
Yeah. We started teaching research in about the 1990s in university, and it soon became obvious really that most of the students didn't have the time or the ability to learn to actually interrogate a research paper properly, very superficially. So we just fell back on guidelines. What do the nice guidelines say? And even in your own field, it's very hard to substantiate everything for yourself. We just accept it. I mean, I've actually measured the distance to the moon. Didn't get it quite right, but that's probably about the only parameter in the real world. I've never measured the circumference of the Earth.
No.
I've never measured the distance to the Andromeda Nebula. We just take these things on trust.
Yeah, we do. And the trust is like more than one fold though. We're not saying like, this person said it, so it must be true. We're saying this person said it, and all of the people who could have said that was wrong didn't say it was wrong, and now we think it's true. So, there is that sort of feedback that we have that's so important, that feedback loop and the correction and checks and balances, and it's them going missing that was the really, really bad problem that we haven't fixed. That problem is still there.
There's a Martin Luther King quote, and he said, in the end, what we'll remember is not the cries of our enemies. We expect that. He said, what we'll remember is not the cries of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Really quite profound that our friends, when we needed them, very often remained silent. And of course, the ones that did speak very often weren't allowed to. They didn't meet the mainstream media narrative, which is another problem. So incalculable ongoing harms from lockdowns, and then that's with that. And we're not even economists. I'm sure if we had an economist on, they could start talking now and stop talking next week sometime about the complete disaster.
Yeah, I mean almost you could, before talking about any of the details, you can simply say wealthier societies are healthier societies. Yeah. If you just look at the economic impacts alone, that's going to have a health impact. And you don't do any complicated sums to figure that out. It's obvious.
I mean, I can't remember numbers I've heard. Like, is it 400 billion or is it just silly numbers?
It is silly numbers.
Silly numbers. But of course, it's not numbers. It's money we're going to be paying for the next 100 years, presumably. Yeah,
and it's also the impact on the children who, their earning potential, lifetime earning potential, all of them, that whole generation has taken a massive hit. And that's going to have consequences for decades for the country.
Yeah, absolutely.